On the night of June 17th in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, the President of the United States picked up a pen and signed a document with Iran, the same room where Woodrow Wilson signed the treaty that ended the First World War. The headlines the next morning were brutal and simple. America had just agreed to hand Iran $300 billion, and within hours the President fired back on his own platform, calling the whole story fake news, swearing that the United States would not put up 10 cents. Two versions of the same event completely at war with each other. So which one is true? The answer is that neither headline is honest, and the real story sitting inside that 14-point document is the one nobody is telling you. Here is what you need to understand before we go any further. There are two separate questions buried in this deal, and the loudest voices keep mashing them together on purpose. The first question is whether American taxpayer money is leaving Washington and landing in Tehran. The second question is whether $300 billion is going to flow into Iran from somewhere. Those are not the same question, and the gap between them is exactly where the interesting part lives. Start with the denial, because the President is technically telling the truth. When reporters pressed him at the summit in France, sitting beside the Egyptian president, he was blunt. He said the United States is not investing, not putting up 10 cents, and that there is no fund. His vice president said the same thing in plainer words, that Iran is not receiving any cash and no funds are being released simply for signing. If you are picturing pallets of American cash flying to Tehran, that picture is wrong. On that narrow point, the administration is correct. But now read paragraph 6 of the actual memorandum. The text commits the United States, working with regional partners, to develop a plan for at least $300 billion for the reconstruction and economic development of Iran. The mechanism for how that money moves is left blank. It is explicitly pushed into the next phase of negotiations, so the president can stand at a podium and swear America is not paying a dime, and the document can still promise that $300 billion gets assembled for Iran. Both things are true at the same time. The trick is in two words. Regional partners. This is the part that deserves your full attention, because it is the part the headlines are too lazy to explain. The money is not supposed to come from the US Treasury. It is supposed to come from a coalition of outside players. Gulf states sitting on enormous oil surpluses, looking for somewhere to put it. European and East Asian corporations hunting for the next high-yield contract in a world where safe returns have gotten thin. The structure being sketched out is not a government handout at all. It is an investment framework. A pool of private and allied capital aimed at rebuilding Iranian infrastructure, energy systems, an industry that years of war and sanctions left in ruins. And this is not a brand new trick. Go back a decade to the Obama-era nuclear deal, the one this same president once called horrible and disgusting. Back then, the economic relief for Iran also came not from American taxpayer dollars, but from unfrozen Iranian funds, money that already belonged to Tehran and was simply being released. The administration of the day made the same careful distinction. No US money, they said. And a young real estate developer named Donald Trump stood at a debate stage and called that arrangement a giveaway anyway. A deal where they get $150 billion. He understood the politics of it perfectly. The exact wording of where the money comes from is the whole game. A decade later, he is the one standing on the other side of that same wordplay, swearing not a dime is American, while a number twice as large gets assembled for the same country. The technique has not changed, only the man using it. And that reframes everything, because the question stops being about a charity check from the American taxpayer and starts being about something much bigger. Where does $300 billion of investment capital actually come from in a world that is already stretched thin? When you tell European and Gulf and Asian money that Iran is suddenly open for business, that capital does not appear out of nowhere. It gets pulled from somewhere else, it rotates out of safer assets and chases the higher return. And the most critical detail in the entire document is that none of this is locked in yet. It is a framework, with the actual mechanism deferred to a 60-day negotiating window, a promise of $300 billion riding on a deal that does not technically exist yet. Hold that thought, because the capital question only matters once you understand what else this deal switches on. And that brings us to the two paragraphs that change the physical map of global energy. Paragraph 4. Immediately upon signing, the United States begins removing its naval blockade of Iran and commits to fully ending that blockade within 30 days. Paragraph 5. Iran, in return, commits its best efforts to safe passage of commercial vessels, with no charge for 60 days, and running underneath both of them, paragraph 10, in which the US Treasury agrees to issue waivers so Iran can export crude oil, petroleum products, and everything attached to moving them. Banking, insurance, transport, the whole apparatus. Put those pieces together and you are looking at the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. That narrow stretch of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula carries roughly a fifth of the world's petroleum. Every day in normal times, a parade of tankers threads through a channel only a couple of dozen miles wide at its tightest point, carrying the oil that keeps the global economy running. For months it has been a war zone, choked by blockade and the threat of mines drifting in the shipping lanes. This document is the plan to switch it back on. The blockade comes down inside 30 days. Iran clears the passage and guarantees safe transit. The tankers move, and legal Iranian crude pours back onto the world market for the first time in a long time, with the full banking and insurance machinery switched back on behind it so the trade can actually flow at scale. On its face, that sounds like nothing but good news. The president himself said he hoped the deal would bring peace and push oil prices down. And in the days after the signing, prices did start falling. So where is the problem? The problem is the one nobody waving the headline around has bothered to think through. And it is the reason a careful student of the bond market should be paying very close attention. Think about what you are actually doing here. You're taking the world's most critical energy choke point, 20% of global petroleum transit, and reopening it overnight. At the same time, you're dumping a flood of previously sanctioned Iranian crude back into a market that had already priced its absence. You're not nudging supply, you're hitting the global oil market with a sudden, uncontrolled surge of supply, all at once with no smooth runway. And here is the consequence that the cheerful headline never mention. A controlled drop in oil prices helps everyone at the gas pump, but an uncontrolled crash in oil prices is a different animal entirely. American shale and domestic oil production runs on margins. There is a floor price below which it simply does not pay to pull oil out of the ground in West Texas or North Dakota. Crash through that floor too fast and you do not just give drivers a discount. You start breaking the economics of an entire American industry. Rigs shut down. Capital that was lent against future production starts to look shaky, and that is where it stops being a story about gas prices and becomes a story about debt. This is the piece that matters most, so stay with it. When energy prices fall in a sudden disorderly way, it does not stay contained in the oil patch. It sends a deflationary ripple outward. Cheaper energy drags down the broader inflation picture, which sounds great, until you remember that a huge amount of corporate debt and a huge slice of the bond market was priced around a completely different set of assumptions. A fast deflationary shock scrambles those assumptions. It can force interest rate expectations to lurch, it can blow holes in the balance sheets of energy-heavy lenders, and it can do all of it faster than the system can adjust. The same crude that lowers the number on the gas station sign can, if it arrives as a flood instead of a stream, send a chaotic pulse straight through the credit markets. That is the real reason this deal is not the simple win the headline sold you. The danger was never a check to Iran. The danger is the shockwave from switching the oil back on too fast. And now layer the capital question back on top of it. Remember that $300 billion of allied and private money racing toward Iranian reconstruction. That money is being committed against a deal that is only a framework, which sets up the last and sharpest problem in the entire arrangement. Because this memorandum did not actually solve anything. Read it closely and it is barely a page and a half. The president himself described it as an outline for further talks. It is not a final piece, it is a mutual agreement to keep talking. And the single hardest issue, the fate of Iran's enriched uranium and the future of its nuclear program, was not settled here. It was pushed down the road into the 60-day negotiating window to be hammered out in a final deal that has not been written. So look at what has really been built. A 60-day clock. On one side, the blockade is coming down, the oil is flowing, sanctions waivers are live, and outside capital is being lured in toward Iranian contracts. On the other side, the thing the whole war was supposedly about. The nuclear program remains unresolved, parked, waiting. 60 days of engineered calm with the most dangerous question deliberately left for later. And markets hate exactly one thing more than bad news. They hate uncertainty. Global energy and a growing pile of private capital are now tied to a 60-day fuse. If those negotiations hold, the calm extends and the deal moves towards something real. But if they collapse on day 61, the picture inverts in an instant. Sanctions snap back, the waivers vanish. That outside capital that rushed into Iran is suddenly trapped behind a wall of renewed restrictions. The oil that was flowing freezes, and the United States is right back on a war footing, except now with billions in allied money stuck on the wrong side of the line, and a global energy market whipsawing in both directions. That is the document the headlines reduce to a single angry number, not a $300 billion check. A 60-day bet, with the world's most important energy artery and a flood of foreign capital riding on whether two governments can agree on the one thing they could not agree on before the bombs fell. If you want the real mechanics under the news instead of the headline that fits in a tweet, this is the channel that reads the actual document. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this 60-day clock is going to be the most important story in the world for the next 2 months, and we are going to be watching every tick.